Oh, there we go. Good evening. Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. This is the Wednesday, February 7th, 2018 edition of our little weather get together. And tonight we're going to be reviewing the Southeast Climate Report. We have Jordan McLeod on with us from the Southeast Regional Climate Center. I'll get it right eventually. I have it wrote down right here, and I can't read tonight. So Jordan will be joining us tonight. He's going to be kind of going over the climate report. As we know, it's kind of an active season throughout the Southeast, and we're going to dive into that report tonight and kind of talk about what it meant for our area and maybe what it's going to mean for our area coming up this year. So we're happy to have Jordan. First-time guest, so we'll have him introduce himself here in just a little bit. But before we do that, since we are a live broadcast, we have a few housekeeping things. If you're watching tonight on our Facebook Live, Periscope, our YouTube page, please feel free to interact with us throughout the show. You can do that numerous ways by commenting either on the Periscope feed or the Facebook Live feed, or even on the YouTube page. It gives you an area to comment. And if not, you can interact with us on Twitter at Carolina WX Group. We'll be monitoring those throughout the night as well. And as we are finishing up the program, we'll let Jordan promote his social media accounts, not only for himself, but for the Climate Center as well. And if you have any questions, you can direct them that way as well. And I'll tell you, I use the climate website a lot. And I think after tonight's show, a lot of you guys who are watching tonight will really find some usefulness of what all you can do on the page. So looking forward to having Jordan on with us tonight, and not only talking about the climate report, but also all the things you can do on their website. So with that, it's been a semi-quiet week. We really turned the pattern here. We're not really cold anymore. It's more of a kind of a cool, damp pattern. And today, big rain maker for most of the area. I know here in Western North Carolina, we got close to 1.5 inches of rain, and some areas even seeing some flooding in the Greenville, Spartanburg area, as well as the North Carolina mountains. So a lot of heavy rain today, and we're going to see more heavy rain over the weekend. But it wasn't really change of story down in the Charlotte area. I'll bring in James with this. James, you guys also saw a lot of heavy rain in the Charlotte area today.
Yeah, that's right, Scotty. I was actually just telling everyone before the show that I forgot to bring in my trash cans last night. Don't tell the HOA. And they were left out in the street with their lid open. And when I went to bring them in before, I didn't measure it. This isn't a scientific observation, but there were several inches of rain sloshing around there in the bottom of my trash can. So we did have a pretty eventful morning commute through the first half of the day, compounded by the fact that our GSP radar was down for maintenance. But luckily, we didn't have any severe weather of any sorts. And I'm hearing some late breaking news, Scotty, that you're telling us that that GSP radar may be back up in use as early as tonight.
Yeah, that's correct. I did see a tweet sent out from them just about an hours a half ago, and it said the maintenance was completed and everything was ready to go. So that'll be real helpful as we go into Friday and Saturday and over the weekend with another chance of heavy rain and even some storms. And talking about storms and heavy rain, Shay, you and Jared as well in the Charleston area saw some heavy rain. I'll toss it to Jared first, and then I'll let Shay kind of talk about the effects of the rain as well in his area. But Jared, kind of a soggy day for you guys in the low country as well.
Yeah, we need it. It's kind of funny looking at the climate report. It all fell after 5 o'clock, so there's nothing in the climate report that says anything about rain. So you go to the observations, about 0.3 of an inch. Good little downpour came through. We had first thunder at the airport recorded by the observer at the airport since November 9th. So, woo, storms. We were just really excited to see that. Had a nice shelf cloud come through. And then, we're just on this little roller coaster right now. It seems like every weekend we get at least half of it is rained out, and looks like the upcoming weekend is gonna be the same. But we're trying to we're trying to beat back some drought, so I can deal with that.
Yes, very, very true. A lot of the area in the Southeast needing some rain. And Shay, I'll bring you in on this. I was talking a little bit earlier. Hints of a pattern change, and I know you and I and Jordan and James was talking about this before the show. Really starts to seem that we're flipping that pattern into a more moist pattern and kind of a warmer pattern for us here in the Southeast over the next few weeks.
Well, let me take myself off of mute. That's absolutely right, Scotty. One thing real quick, I want to back up and show the drought monitor for the Southeast, which if you can see everything here, we can see that the drought has been sort of creeping up slowly week by week. And so we have some areas that are starting to become severe, like D2 areas, D3 extreme drought over in Alabama. Some of these areas abnormally dry into South Carolina and even spreading towards the coastline. But the good thing is that the radar signatures from today with the cold front, this cold front has sort of stalled along the coastline. So that's continuing some of the Gulf moisture across some of these areas that really need this rain pretty badly. So it's a good thing for this front and maybe some of the other fronts to come as well. When we talk about the future pattern, I'll run from Tropical Tidbits, one of my favorite little sites here to go to. And we sort of see a pattern where the mid-Atlantic states and to the north are going to get some of this colder air and some of the snowstorms as they normally would this time of the year. And when we start running the models, we don't want to get too far out in time, but we can see that the high pressure that moves out into the Atlantic really brings up a southerly draw, and you can see the moisture lifting up into the southeast region by Saturday, February the 10th. So we have more moisture on the way along where undulating fronts are to the north, and then we just get a lot of moisture. We had this Bermuda high sort of sitting out here and just keeping that southerly warm flow with moisture training up into the southeast. So I think we're going to see the drought pretty much diminish here over the next few weeks or so, as this pattern seems to want to continue over and over again. So we could be setting up for a rather warm, maybe a warmer than expected latter half of February. And we're just going to watch and see what happens, though. But it looks like we're right now for the southeast, we're looking pretty good. You know, we got moisture and warmth. The only thing we may need to look for in the future is some severe weather.
All right, thank you for that, Shay. And I'll bring in the one guy who did have a little brush with some winter weather. We'll bring in Eric. Eric, you guys had a little bit of everything yesterday. I think you had thunder, lightning, and maybe some snow flurries or sleet pellets in the Memphis area.
We were that close. We did have thunder and lightning, and we were 2 counties south of the winter weather advisory. The precipitation we got overnight, which brought inch and a half of rain from last evening into the overnight hours. So pretty good deluge here. But the precip moved out just as the temperatures were falling. We did hit 32 this morning, but it was after the rain had ended. So we skated by. Well, we didn't really skate by. We got through that event because we would have been skating if we'd been in Northeast Arkansas last night. Some reports of about 1/4 inch of ice, freezing rain up there last night. So they were under an ice storm warning. But we made it through with just rain, which I'm happy about. The clouds stuck around today. We got to a balmy 36 this afternoon for the high. And we are in an area of the southeast that is not in a drought. And so we keep getting an event like this every 3 or 4 days, and we're going to stay that way, I think.
Very much so. And Eric, you brought a memory. James, I don't know why we didn't talk about this, but we even had a little bit of ice here in the Carolinas over the weekend. And
we did. That's right. It feels like a millennium ago, but
not much of an issue.
No, it was one of those early in the morning, little bit of icing, especially up in your neck of the woods in the foothills. Not so much here in South Charlotte, but then by the time we got to noon, it was raining and it was all gone. It does remind me of the tale that I think was 2017. I want to say about mid-March. We had snow in the morning, and then it was like 60 some odd, almost 70 degrees in the afternoon. And my sister happened to be visiting that day from upstate New York, and she was very confused. So it reminded me very much of that day.
That is, it was, I think some areas, we got close to a 1/4 inch of ice, but by 1 o'clock Sunday afternoon, everything was warmed up and almost melted away. So I'm going to put on my Florida Gator hat tonight.
Oh, come on.
Because I'm going to toss this to James Brierton, who is a graduate of the University of Georgia, who's going to be talking to Jordan McLeod, who is also a Georgia Bulldog, and I just couldn't really stand all that Georgia love going on in here. So, James, I'm going
to like you, Scotty.
My Gators and we're going to toss it to you guys, and we'll start tonight's conversation.
I meant to cover up my big bald head with my University of Georgia hat, and I will have to go get it, Jordan. But I think Jordan is wearing a Super G shirt tonight or sweater. What is that there, Jordan?
Yeah, I've got my black UGA polo on tonight.
Okay, so we are representing. That's right. So we had Dr. Marshall Shepard on a few weeks ago. You may recall there was a lot of Georgia love. So Jordan and I were in some of those classes together. So it's good to talk with you again, and thanks for coming on the show tonight. I'm going to start off our Q&A with a really simple question, but I know some of the panelists on our show are familiar with the work of the Southeast Regional Climate Center, but I'm not sure our audience may be fully aware of it. So first question tonight is, can you just tell us a little bit about what the Climate Center does?
Sure. So, my name is Jordan McLeod. I'm the regional climatologist at the Southeast Regional Climate Center. We're located in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Go Heels! And we, let's see, I've been in this position for going on about 2.5 years now. So we're one of 6 regional climate centers across the country. Each one of them are responsible for probably about a 5 or 6 state region. And so our area of responsibility is Alabama, Georgia, Florida, the Carolinas, Virginia, and also Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands down in the Caribbean. So pretty, diverse area in terms of different weather and climate extremes. I want to give a shout out to two of my colleagues. So the director of the center is Dr. Chip Conrad. He's been at the center for many years now, I think since 2007, if memory serves right. And William Schmitz is our service climatologist. And so he, answers the phone for media requests. He's in charge of our social media accounts, which I'll introduce a little bit later on. And also, helps me out tremendously with looking up climate data for the reports, like the one I'll be sharing shortly. So we, that's kind of an overview of what we do. We're sort of responsible for analyzing, any weather and climate data across the region. And what we really try to do is value add that data. Anybody can go on the internet now and look up, what were the temperatures over the past year, numbers like that. But what we try to do is really value add that and produce products or graphics or reports that sort of tell the story behind those numbers.
And you mentioned the report, and we're going to go through it here pretty extensively, and you're going to do a much better job of it than I can. So I'm happy we have you. But I was starting to look over it yesterday and got a little highlighter crazy at times because there were some areas that really popped out at me, not only as a great kind of walkthrough of what we experienced in 2017, the extremes, the highs and the lows, and the averages of everything in between, but there are really also some really key events that I think we've been talking about here in the Carolina Weather Group, such as Hurricane Irma and such, that really stand out. And I'm glad you mentioned your states that you guys cover as well too, because obviously we focus a lot on North Carolina and South Carolina, but you guys have some great data here on some of our neighboring states and also some of those islands you talked about as well too. So they're all kind of here in the report. And what an eventful 2017 it was for so much of that region. And I want to go through it in just a moment. But before we do that, just so we can, I think, kind of all grasp a little bit of what you guys do on a day in and day out basis. What's an average day for you like as a regional climatologist?
Yeah, it's a great question. So typically, I go into the office and sort of, check through and see, what's happened over the previous day. If there were any notable weather events, such as we had this the freezing rain event that you guys were talking about in parts of the Carolinas and really up into Virginia as well. My job is to kind of go through any of the National Weather Service products that are issued, like public information statements, we call P&S products. Any sort of summaries that have been put out by the Weather Service. We work in close collaboration with all of the different weather forecast offices across our region, really valuable partners. And so I go, with the help of William Schmitz, go through those products and try to really synthesize or summarize the information that's in there in kind of a regional perspective. We don't always get we don't get down into the super nitty-gritty details all the time, but we try to kind of keep things in a broader regional context. And really, I think a key word, and it's also the name of one of our key products that I'll show, is try to put weather and climate information into perspective, and really into historical perspective. So If we've noticed that there's been extreme snowfall totals that have been recorded, we try to go back in the database and see just how extreme those are and try to put that into context for people to understand.
And there's all sorts of really interesting data in here, not only from a weather and climate perspective, but also as folks are listening, I think maybe just shout out a few of these. But you talked about snowfall and the like, and going back to last year, Mount Mitchell, North Carolina, absorbed its highest one-day snowfall for December and its fourth highest one-day snowfall for any month on record, an accumulation of 25 inches. I mean, that's quite a lot of snow. And I know you're going to be walking us through some of this, but as I was highlighting last night, I couldn't help but think we're just going to have all these local shout outs for folks who are listening and tuning in tonight as we make our way through this report. What do you guys use to, I know you mentioned the National Weather Service and the public information statements, but are there certain tool sets that are out there that you guys use to monitor and observe these events? And I ask that with the notion in mind that today we had lots of rain come through the region, but we had no radar in Greenville, Spartanburg, no radar in Charleston, Jacksonville. I mean, how does that affect what you guys are doing?
Yeah, I mean, that can be pretty substantially impactful at times, for what we're doing. I would say, one way to distinguish what we do at the Climate Center versus like a weather forecast office, for example, we're not we are degreed meteorologists, but we don't do forecasting for our jobs. And so that's a really key distinction to make for viewers, is that we're not a forecasting agency, although I'd say we're capable of doing that. But we really look at things in a retrospective manner. And so after a storm, has come through, for example, let's just say a severe weather outbreak, I'll sort of monitor storm surveys, for example. If there's been a tornado outbreak, I'll sort of monitor how many storm surveys are put out. These are conducted by the Weather Service. They go out and use the damage path of tornadoes to rate and also assess tornadoes and to determine if they occur, for example. I gather all of that information and compile it, to use in all of our reports. And, also if there's really noteworthy aspects of a given weather event, we really try to push that information out to all of our users, via social media. Social media has been a tremendous outlet for us as the Climate Center to really put out this information to a wide variety of users, so that they can, really start to understand how these weather events fit into a climate perspective.
So let me ask you a little bit about this report here. It's dozen or so pages in length, lots of data sets in it, and some graphics that you guys put together as well too. Can you just, I guess from a high level, to kick things off, how would you summarize what stood out to you in this 2017 report that you and your colleagues put together?
I honestly, off the top of my head, I would say it was a year with a little bit of everything for the region. We, as I kind of reflected back through the report today, probably doing similar to what you were doing, kind of highlighting different sections that I thought were really important to bring out this evening. It's just amazing how many different variety of weather extremes and impacts and different types of events were recorded. Anything from a big winter storm, actually a couple of big winter storms, one in January 2017 and then one this past December. We had record-breaking tornado activity across the region, particularly Georgia, and I'll try to remember to mention that later on. Obviously, the tropical cyclone season was a huge story, perhaps the biggest story for the Southeast. 7 landfalling tropical cyclones. Not all of those made landfall in our region, but they did go on to have indirect or even actually direct impacts in our region. And let's see what else. We had, again, exceptional warmth across the region, which just kind of seems to be a broken record at this point. So anyway, I would just say, a year with a little bit of everything.
I don't want to rob you too much of the highlights you've made. I've made just one or two here. And you mentioned the warmth, and I know this conversation tends to get a little political, but that's not what we're looking to do here. We're just looking at the data sets. But this sentence kind of jumped out to me. 2/3 of the long-term stations, the weather observation stations, observed or tied their warmest annual mean temperature on record, including Asheville and Columbia in the Carolinas. South Carolina observed its warmest year on record, while North Carolina tied their warmest. I mean, I'm only holding the 2017 report. I know you've been in this job for a little bit. That would be the trend, more or less, would it not?
Definitely. I mean, it seems like, at least in the, the few years that I've been doing this, it seems like every year we continue to set new record-breaking warm records, across the region. And, whether we're looking at this from a station-based perspective, so individual stations, like you mentioned, Augusta and Columbia, Asheville and others, we had, like you said, 23 of those across the region. And again, these are long-term stations, which in this report I defined as having at least 50 years of data. So, we're looking at stations that have a very good period of record, very good data efficacy. And so it's really impressive that we would have that many that are observing their warmest annual mean temperature on record. But then also, if we aggregate all of that station data, and NCEI, or the National Centers for Environmental Information, who's our source of funding within NOAA, they create what we refer to as state average data, and they produce that usually actually right about this time every month, kind of the end of the first week into the second week. And if we look at that data aggregated into, for each state, yeah, we're seeing, like this year, we saw, I think, 3 states that either tied or observed their warmest year on record. Previous years, it could have been different states, but we're seeing across the Southeast, this, like you said, this general upward trend in temperatures.
Being where we are in winter in February, I think many of us like a quick peek at snow, and then we're ready to move on to some other things, and we all get excited when the warm temperatures come on out. But it is winter after all. And so I was thinking about that last night, reading that Charlotte, North Carolina, where I am, spent 236 days, or 65% of the year, above 70 degrees as their maximum afternoon high. Raleigh, some 231 days. We get these warm spells here, and we're all really grateful that the weather is warm. But this eventually, after continuing for several days, we'll come up to the level of, I guess, being into the climate. I think what I'm trying to get at, not only is it a great sales pitch for the Carolinas to tell Northerners who are tired of winter that they can come on down here and spend 65% of the year or more in 60-degree plus temperatures. Mom, Dad, I'm looking at you. But I know recently the AMS, the American Meteorological Society, published a letter to a certain high government official who, I don't want to get into politics, but just to remind that individual the difference between climate and weather. So before I have you, Jordan, go through the bullet points you guys have here, can you set that stage for us, the difference between climate and weather?
Sure. I mean, honestly, if I failed this question, I probably should have both of my degrees stripped from me. So, you can tell me how good I do, but no, kidding aside. Yeah, I mean, basically, weather is just short-term variations in atmospheric conditions at a given location, or it may be up to a regional scale. So we're talking about, parameters like atmospheric moisture. So think of that as like humidity at the surface, air temperature, wind speed, cloudiness, whether it's precipitating or not. All of those different conditions combined together produce what we think of as weather. And again, this varies on a relatively shorter time scale. So anywhere from minutes to hours to days to maybe a week or a couple of weeks at the most. It's a little bit, the boundary between weather and climate can be a little fuzzy at times. But, so that's kind of weather. And then climate is more of the longer term average of those weather conditions. And I want to be careful because, I learned, a key distinction is it's not just the average of those weather conditions. Climatologists typically look at a 30-year period as kind of the representative sample of weather conditions, if you will. but it's also, I think it's useful to think about climate in terms of a distribution. So hopefully we all kind of remember the bell curve or the normal distribution, back in statistics. And so that's, to me, I kind of think of that distribution when I think about climate as, the average is kind of the peak of the bell, if you will, so sort of the middle of that curve. But you also can't forget the two tails of that distribution, or that's what we think of as extremes. So it's kind of that combination of average weather conditions, which honestly are not really observed all that frequently, and sort of that tail portion of the distribution, or the extremes that are occasionally observed.
I have to apologize, Jordan, to one of my panelists who was trying to give me the wave signal to tell me he had a question. And so I'm going to make my way back down to Charleston, South Carolina. And Shay Gibson, I think, has a question for you. My apologies, Shay. The floor is yours.
No, James, all good, all great points leading to the bulk of the topic that we're getting into tonight. I wanted to ask you real quick, though, Jordan, when you're collecting all this data, I'm sure that you're getting information from the Weather Service offices across the Southeast region and wherever your prospective regions are. Are there any other tools that you use, say like the CocoRoss network, or any other private network, private weather company, anyone else that you're getting data from that's considered official or unofficial, or how are you compiling everything to get your products?
It's a great question, Shay, and the short answer to that question is yes. We're absolutely focused a bit, exclusively there on the Weather Service. But you're right. I mean, we also definitely take into account the CocoRoss network. That's been tremendous in sort of filling in the gaps. I mean, we have, I would say, in the Southeast, we have a pretty dense network of sort of first order stations, if you will. So the ASOS network, the automated system, and also the cooperative observer network. But it's still not dense enough to capture, especially, for example, during the summertime when we have pop-up convective thunderstorms and we're trying to figure out what's the highest rainfall that we observed across a given area. The CocoRoss network really comes in handy there, where we can drill even finer down to what people are observing. And we use CocoRoss stations at the Climate Center in our reports frequently. Give you a shout out too. I know you're part of the WeatherFlow network, and I used several of the WeatherFlow station wind observations in the report for Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. That came in tremendously handy for me, because there's relatively fewer stations, as you know, in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, at least first order stations. So that WeatherFlow network was great for us to be able to find, fill in the gaps there.
Yeah, NHC, we're partnered with them, so it's a great relationship that we have to be able to share the data with them and have them put it into their reports. So I'm kind of guessing here that sort of continuing on, we looked at, to the viewers here, my apologies, the CocoRoss network has to do with precipitation, how much rainfall has fallen over an area. There are other tools though, like, and this is kind of where you talked about real time versus after the fact. Do you ever look at real-time radar for any kind of information on severe weather? Do you say you don't forecast, but do you observe in real time what you're doing?
Definitely. I mean, we definitely track weather systems. Whether it be a winter storm or perhaps a March March cyclone with severe weather, or even a landfalling tropical cyclone. We track those in real time, and really, I think it gives us an appreciation for how an event develops. And, by us sort of tracking that in real time, I think we're able to really sort of gather bits of information that, will really help us in whether it's reporting or whether we want to send out information via social media. I think by following it as it develops, that kind of helps us as meteorologists assess the storm in a deeper way, rather than if we just wait for the storm to finish and dissipate or move on. Then we're kind of retracing our steps, and we may forget things along the way. So we definitely use all of the the operational radar, satellite, the GOES 16 satellites have been tremendous here in just the short amount of time it's been operational. Obviously all of the station observations, we track those in real time as well. So definitely a part of what we do.
Good deal. And last part for me is, do you consider what you do partially forensic meteorology, or do you have to go back and study systems, maybe even download level 2 radar, things of that nature in order to go back and study a system?
Yeah, that's actually a really great way to put it. Yeah, I think there is that component, because even when you're tracking a storm in real time, there's only, you're trying to document things. I keep and my colleague William, we both keep weather logs, that we, as a month develops, we sort of copy down what we think are the most important things that have occurred. And we sort of try to stay on top of things as best we can, but inevitably at the end of the month, as we're sort of preparing to write the report, there's always little bits of information that may have slipped through the cracks, and so we find ourselves going back to the databases or there's a lot of great archive resources out there for radar, satellite, a variety of sources. NCEI has some great products. And other people have put up great archives as well. So we definitely go back and dig through that to mine everything really to the best that we can.
Very good. Thank you very much. James, back to you.
Thank you, Shay. And I'm actually going to go right back over to Eric, who I think has a question for Jordan as well. And then, Jordan, I'll have you take us through some of the highlights of the report. But first, I think Eric has a question regarding data.
I do. I wanted to just follow up briefly on the data sources that you're using. Of course, there's, especially when you're trying to trend data from one year to the next and so forth, data quality is an important part of that as well. So I'm kind of wondering, with changing of maybe build up around an ASOS station over the years, where you end up getting some bias in that, or if you're using things like CocoRAS and some of the other data that is going to have its kind of inherent biases in it. Do you account for that, or do you allow like NCEI and others to kind of do that quality assessment for you and then just use the end product?
That's a great question. Yeah, so I would say there's a mixture of it's sort of a mixed answer, I guess I'll put it. There's times when we sort of rely on, so for example, if we're looking at an urban station, let's just say Miami, Florida, for example, we noticed that last year there was a tremendous number of days that it observed daily minimum temperatures that were above 80 degrees Fahrenheit. It smashed its old annual record, and we believe that to be accurate, but there could be some change due to the siting and urban development around the airport where that station is. There could be some subtle influences of non-meteorological factors that are playing into those temperature measurements. Unfortunately, we don't directly account for some of those things in some of the numbers that we're reporting. We just simply report what that ASOS station recorded. However, yeah, and we sort of leave most of that sort of quality control to NCEI. However, if we do notice, and actually I have to give credit to William Schmitz, the service climatologist. This is something that he does quite a bit in his work, and he could probably speak to it better than I, but all the time he notices data and quality control issues with station observations. As an example, during the recent winter storm that we had, he noticed that a lot of the co-op stations, or sort of the human observers, they were putting in snowfall totals in inches into the liquid equivalent precipitation column. So, basically they were reporting 5 inches of liquid equivalent precipitation when we knew that there was, that was not the case, that they were trying to report the snowfall total. So he would go through and request that all of those values be changed in the official ASIS database, as it's called. So we do actively engage in that type of quality control.
Thanks much. Appreciate it. Good.
So, Jordan, I want to hit on some of the highlights of the 2017 report, and we can continue to do this kind of in a Q&A fashion if you'd like, or certainly I know you spent obviously a great amount of time on the report itself, and I don't know if you would like to lead us through that part of the discussion.
Whatever is easiest for you.
Well, I'll ask about this, and I know we touched upon it a moment ago with regards to tropical cyclones, both those that made landfall and didn't. The ones that did, just to quote here, those landfalling tropical cyclones contributed to at least 10% of the annual precipitation absorbed in portions of every state within the region. Mind you, again, your region including more than, of course, just our Carolinas here, but also Florida and the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico and the like. I'm wondering if you had to slap a headline on the 2017 report, would it have something to do with these tropical cyclones that we saw in 2017?
Absolutely. Yeah, they were definitely one of the biggest headlines, if not the biggest headline. And honestly, I think a lot of that has to do also with what has happened recently in previous years prior to 2017. We had really been through, well-documented hurricane drought, for portions of the region, particularly Florida. I think it had been since 2005 with Hurricane Wilma was the last time that a hurricane had made landfall in Florida prior to Hurricane Irma last year. So there had been, sort of this lull in hurricane activity overall. Now, I don't want to misstate. There were also, even during those relatively quiet years, we still had some very impactful storms like Sandy and Irene in 2011 and others. But it had been quite a while since we'd seen a season like this where we had a relatively high frequency of storms and also quite a few storms that were very intense and that made landfall as well. So I think all of those factors really came together to produce a kind of a blockbuster season.
And I know
Jordan,
go ahead, Shay.
Oh, sorry. I just want to supplement that real quick. Your reports are very, very detailed, and you talk about Hurricane Irma, citrus fruit losses that range from less than 30% to nearly 100% in groves across central and southern Florida. I mean, you talk about the quantity of fruit that dropped from trees due to high winds, 50-mile-per-hour wind stripping off immature nuts and blowing down pecan trees, and all kinds of things having to do with agriculture with these systems. Can you tell us a little bit how you gathered that data?
Yeah. So one thing, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's really, we consider ourselves weather geeks for sure at the Climate Center. And we're all into, gathering really interesting meteorological and climate stats, and the report is certainly full of that. But what we don't want to forget too is the human and societal impacts that are associated with that. And so we really try to focus on that as well in the reports. And so, there's a variety of different sources that I get that agricultural information from. One is the USDA agricultural reports that are actually issued weekly during the growing season, and then they're issued monthly, right now during the winter off season. And those are issued by state, so all of the states have their own reports, and they issue them regularly. And there's a lot of great sort of on-the-ground information that agricultural producers, ranchers, a wide, fruit and vegetable producers, they put in all sorts of great details that I really can mine and gather when we have significant events like a hurricane landfall, for example. Another key resource is Pam Knox. So she's an agricultural climatologist at UGA, the University of Georgia. I became acquainted with her. Dr. John Knox, her husband, was one of my professors there. And so she has been a tremendous resource for us. She has a blog that she posts a lot of really interesting agricultural articles that tie in, sort of examine the weather and climate linkages to agriculture. So I really mine her blog and some of the articles that she posts there.
And
Very
another
good. James,
example
back to you.
Thank you, Shay. Another example of that comes on the section about severe weather, where you guys talk about on May 30th, thunderstorm wind gusts estimated at 80 to 90 miles per hour caused trees to fall on several homes and vehicles across Sampson County, North Carolina. You may all remember that's also where the roof was ripped off the fire department, injuring at least 12. To Shay's point, approximately 16,000 turkeys were killed as the strong winds destroyed numerous poultry houses. I mean, again, just applauding the level of detail here across the board, because that was a detail that had slipped my mind, and I hope that you know that you're in good company tonight in terms of nerds who really appreciate all this data, because I think I got a little carried away with the highlighting on this page.
Hey,
I'm
James.
kind of tempted to read the whole thing. Yes, Scotty.
You're talking about severe weather, and I didn't want to take away from your notes, but that was the part that really stuck out to me with being in Western North Carolina and all the numerous tornadoes. But Jordan, looking at your report, a total of 312 tornadoes in the Southeast. 65% of those was in the month of January, which I found fascinating. Yep. And it was the 5th most tornadoes reported in the Southeast since records have been kept. I mean, that's amazing for last year of just how many tornadoes there was here in the Southeast.
Definitely, the severe weather was definitely another key headline that really came out of last year's report. And there's just so many different nuggets that I could spend time on here. But you're right. I mean, the tornado activity across the region. I'm glad you got that map up that I produced to go along with the report. And so each of those triangles represents a confirmed, and these are all confirmed tornadoes, by the way. They're not just the sort of the LSR local storm reports. These are the confirmed tornadoes, and color coded by season. And and I think James mentioned this earlier. Georgia was really the epicenter of a lot of the tornado activity last year. It set, I believe, it set the state record for the most tornadoes that it's observed in its history going back to 1950. Over a third of those 312 tornadoes occurred in Georgia alone.
I think your report said 27 in one day and 41 in a 2-day time frame for tornadoes. I mean, that's Oklahoma, Kansas numbers right there.
Yeah, January was just off the charts. I remember that vividly. I'm actually grew up in central Georgia, actually right where that red triangle is in the center of the state. That's about where I grew up, and spent the first 16 years of my life there, near the city of Macon. January was just absolutely incredible in terms of just days and days of several different outbreaks that affected the state. And you're right, they set their daily record, their 2-day record. I believe the month of January was a record, and the year. So they basically, it was a full house if you're a poker fan. Really impressive. And unfortunately, I think one aspect that I highlighted, of the 17 fatalities and at least 91 injuries across the entire region that were caused by tornadoes, 16 of those 17 fatalities and at least 62 of the 91 injuries occurred in Georgia. So not only did we see the lion's share of the tornadoes themselves, unfortunately, we saw a lot of the human impacts there, which you might expect.
Definitely so. And I was just going to, one other thing, and I'll give it back to you, James. One other thing I just found fascinating is, 4,059 severe weather reports. That's up 120% of normal. Obviously, the months of April, May, and July with those coming out. But my question to you is, doing the research, have you seen an uptick in severe weather? Obviously, last year's tornado, I don't want to say it's an anomaly because we do get tornadoes in the Southeast, but it was kind of an uptick from that. But the overall scheme of doing this, do you guys find that there's more severe weather reports going on now in the Southeast and maybe even tornadoes than what we've seen in the past?
That's a great question. I think so. It's a tricky issue because the severe storm report database that the SPC, or the Storm Prediction Center, which I get all of this data from, by the way, it's a great archive. I mean, it's very comprehensive in terms of their reporting, and they categorize severe weather reports down into whether it's thunderstorm winds, straight line winds, tornadoes, and hail. But one issue with that is a reporting bias over time. And so we have to keep that in mind looking at some of these reports numbers, and especially when you're thinking about it in terms of trends over time. A lot of the earlier years, so say, so the database goes back to 1950. And so I would say from about 1950 to say 1980-ish or so, maybe even 1990 when the Doppler radar technology came online, that there was obviously there was fewer people that lived in the region. Technology was not nearly what it was today, and so severe weather just simply wasn't observed as much, and therefore it wasn't reported as consistently as it is today. So we have to be really, and actually at the Climate Center, we actually did a study looking at some of these reporting trends specifically for tornadoes. And we found that for tornadoes specifically, it's better to exclude F0s or EF0s when you're looking at trends over time, because those weakest tornadoes are often left out disproportionately in the earlier portion of the record, just because there were fewer people around to observe them, and they're just weak and short-lived, and we didn't have Doppler radar to detect them. So anyway, what I'm getting at is that it's easy to look at that data record and say, oh, severe weather is really on the increase across the Southeast. But we would need to sort of account for the reporting and to detrend that, according to those biases that are in the reporting. But nonetheless, taking all of that into account, I would still say there's been quite not this winter, just from all of the cold that we've had, but there's been quite a few previous winters where we've seen higher than usual severe weather activity across the Southeast, and certainly 2017 was an example.
Definitely. One last point, and I'll toss it. I know Jared has a question. One last point. With as crazy as the tornado season was, Ashe County in North Carolina, Western North Carolina, recorded their first tornado ever. And if you're not familiar with Ashe County, that's on the border of Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee. It's in the high mountains, and they indeed did have a tornado. I think it was from Tropical Storm Nate. When Nate was moving through the Southeast. So again, right. Just a crazy, crazy year for tornadoes in the Southeast.
That's a good example too of, one of the key tornado myths out there is that tornadoes they don't occur in mountains, that it just doesn't work that way. Well, here's a good example of, yes, they aren't as common in elevated terrains like Western North Carolina, but they do occur when we have, very powerful storm systems or a hurricane that's penetrating inland. They can produce tornadoes in mountainous areas. So that's, kind of an interesting example debunking that popular myth.
Definitely so. James or Jared, Shay, whoever.
Yeah, Jared has
Jordan. Yeah, Jordan. When we think of billion-dollar disasters, we think of hurricanes, we think of severe weather, we think of floods, things like that. But the first billion-dollar disaster was freeze. Very hard freeze that happened, and as you know, it didn't happen abnormally late in the year, but we had very abnormal warmth during February that helped to get things blooming. Is the RCC finding that we're seeing more and more impacts from these kinds of freezes towards the end of the year, or towards the end of the season and the beginning of the growing season there?
I think it's certainly it's troublesome at times, to really diagnose some of these freeze events, because I think the key point that you made there is that this, the freeze last March, it wasn't particularly late or unusually late in the spring season, but nonetheless, we still had tremendous impacts from that particular freeze. And like you mentioned, a lot of that had to do with the prior winter season, where it was just persistently warm throughout, extending from December all the way through February. And so a lot of these fruit crops in particular, they weren't able to accumulate what agricultural producers refer to as chill hours. And so it's defined as an hour of time in which the air temperature is 45 degrees or less. And so these chill hours are really important for fruit crops to kind of remain dormant during the winter season, and so that they don't bud prematurely in, say, late February going into March, which would make them more vulnerable to a spring freeze, whether it's early in the season or late. And so, unfortunately, we saw kind of the worst case scenario develop last winter going into the spring, where we had essentially, some of the fewest chill hours that have been recorded on record for some of these crops. And unfortunately, that freeze came at a very unfortunate time and destroyed a lot of the peach crop in particular in Georgia and South Carolina, and also blueberries as well.
I'm going to follow up on that question and screen share here for you. I observed snowfall analysis from the event in the middle of December, a couple weeks before Christmas. We'll stay on the cold weather topic here for a minute. This was pretty phenomenal as well. I know several snow records were set out of this event. Suburban Atlanta with multiple inches of snow. You're seeing 6 inches in east of Birmingham. What kind of stands out to you from this event? A little bit different than maybe something that's is going to cause a lot of damage, but certainly a notable event.
Definitely, yeah. This was a really interesting storm in a couple of regards. First is just the a very long, broad swath of snowfall extending. I mean, even outside of our region, all the way down to New Orleans and portions of southern Louisiana, all the way up to past Richmond, Virginia, into the eastern shore of Virginia and Maryland and Delaware. Just a really long continuous swath of snow, and I believe Mobile, Alabama, they recorded an inch with this system, and that was their earliest snowfall on record. So if we think earliest in terms of starting a winter season in December, this was their earliest on record. And then the other, I think the other big feature of this particular storm system is just that bullseye there in kind of northwest of Atlanta, where some of the heaviest snowfall totals were recorded in this entire system, beating out in some cases portions of western North Carolina that benefit from topography, high elevation, so places like I think Dallas, northwest of Atlanta, a co-op station that. Several stations that observed their highest one-day snowfall for any month on record, not just December. So I think there were at least 3 of those stations northwest of Atlanta. Thankfully, that bullseye was not directly over the city of Atlanta and didn't cause another snowpocalypse or snowmageddon like we observed several years ago. That could have been a nightmare, but nonetheless, we did see some pretty significant impacts from this in terms of transportation and power outages and so forth.
And Jordan, I have one more question for you. Sorry, James.
No, go ahead, Jay.
I wanted to ask. I know we talked a little bit about this briefly before the show. Not getting into the matrix for the air temperatures and any of that, but do you look at the ENSO phasing, which is the La Nina and El Nino phasing, as part of your studies? Do you correlate any of this information with the ENSO cycles?
We don't. I wouldn't say that we, sort of directly, perform those types of analyses. We don't, directly correlate what we're looking at, in sort of a research perspective. Although that's, certainly interesting. But we do definitely keep in mind, what phase of the ENSO cycle we're in and how that could be operating in terms of the regional climate of the Southeast. I mean, the Southeast does, as it has a very distinct El Nino, La Nina signature at times, although there can be some variability in terms of the temperature and precipitation response. And I think we're seeing some of that this winter, even though we're in a La Nina, and we have seen an uptick in drought conditions. It's going to be interesting to see how that finishes out here in February, but definitely ENSO is a very important teleconnection that we take into account. Also, other teleconnections like the NAO is a big one, especially during the winter season. So this for viewers, this is the North Atlantic Oscillation. Basically looks at sea level pressure patterns between the northern Atlantic and sort of the central Atlantic or further to the south. And, it seems like we've been in, we've had some periods in the NAO negative pattern where we've had a lot of high pressure or blocking patterns over Greenland. And so that's allowed a lot of trophiness or areas of low pressure to really persistently park themselves, if you will, over parts of the Southeast. And I think that's kind of been the part of the story so far this winter with all the persistent cold that we've had, is just this kind of pattern, this teleconnection pattern sort of locking in place.
Jordan, I think we hit on a lot of the highlights that we picked out from the report. But as we head towards the 1 hour mark of our broadcast this evening, I wanted to give you the opportunity to share anything that maybe jumped out at you or stood out or stands out as you look back at the report you compiled for 2017.
Yeah, let's see here. I think we covered a lot of stuff. You know, the drought situation was kind of interesting last year, and it wasn't necessarily a huge story, especially compared to 2016. You know, in the latter part of 2016, especially autumn, we had a very intense drought that gripped a lot of the Southeast, and it led to one of the worst wildfire seasons that we've seen in parts of the region, particularly North Carolina. And the Gatlinburg, Tennessee fire was one of those prevalent fires, really destructive as well. So we were kind of moving out of that into the beginning of 2017. And you can kind of, I'm glad you brought that graphic up. You can really see there in January and February, moving into March, you know, sort of the vestiges or the remnants of that drought with, you know, D2 and D3 severe to extreme drought still kind of anchored in parts of Alabama and Georgia, and even parts of Western Carolinas. But we got some really beneficial rainfall during the late winter and into the spring season that really, you know, cut down on that interior drought. But what was happening at sort of the same time was that we saw an emergence rather of drought conditions in southern Georgia and much of Florida. And that led to an extremely active wildfire season in those areas. We saw the West Mims fire was a huge fire in the Okefenokee Swamp that, you know, caused a lot of ecological damage there locally, but also we saw tourist reductions to that area, even along the Atlantic beaches that were nearby. So you know, we also saw ash and smoke that descended on Jacksonville, Florida for a couple of days from that fire. So, you know, really impactful fire season. And then, you know, the pattern kind of changed again, and we saw the rains return during the summer, the wet season for Florida. That really helped them out. So, you know, long story short, I guess what I'm getting, there's kind of been this oscillation and drought from the interior portion of the region to some of the more coastal areas. And now we're, you know, I think we lately, within the past few months, we've seen the switch back to a drier interior and a wetter coastal area. And certainly the tropical cyclones eliminated any vestiges of the coastal drought, especially in Florida. But it's just a kind of interesting seesaw pattern, if you will, that kind of noticed, you know, between different areas of drought in the region.
Well, I know we are only 2 months here into 2018. You did an outstanding job with the 2017 report, and I understand the January snapshot is out, January of this year. So how does this year look like it's starting off for us?
Cold, believe it or not, below average temperatures, which is something that we have not seen in quite a while, at least to the intensity that we saw during January. So yeah, below average temperatures. Dryness continued across much of the region, although we did see some start to see some improvements towards the end of the month with the rainfall wetter pattern returning. So hopefully that will continue throughout February as well. Severe weather has been extremely quiet so far this winter, especially compared to last winter. I think we've only had less than half a dozen confirmed tornadoes since December 1st. So, severe, and obviously there's a good correlation between, these really cold patterns and shutting off any kind of thunderstorm activity. So those really go hand in hand. So yeah, that's kind of where we stand right now.
Appreciate that snapshot there very much. As we come up on the 1 hour mark of our broadcast, I'll invite our listeners to stay tuned because I know Jared Smith is going to be giving us a breakdown of an event many of you will probably remember for some time if you were living along the coast in regards to this week's false tsunami warning. But before we do that, I promised Jordan, and we were looking forward to this as well too, so I wanted to give you some time to kind of walk us through the Southeast Regional Climate Center's website to show off some of these tool sets that are available not only to you guys, but to the general public as well too.
Great. Yeah, I'd love to do that here. So I'll go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully that will work. Does everything look okay on your end?
Let's switch on over to that web page. I think right now we're looking at Google Hangouts. It's doing a little bit of an inception thing, and I think we're looking at it now. Yep, we got it.
Okay, good. So yeah, the first thing I wanted to show. Well, let me go back here just to the home page. So this is CERC.com. CERC being short for Southeast Regional Climate Center. So this is our home page. We've got a nice. If you scroll down a little bit, we've got this rotating series of maps here in the middle, just kind of showing snapshots of our climate perspectives tool, and whether it be temperatures, the values, temperature rankings like this particular map. So it just kind of scrolls through, but I'll give you a short demo of climate perspectives here in just a second. And then some of our featured products here over in this right-hand column. But before I do that, I want to give a little plug here to the users. We just started a new subscription service. So if you are interested in receiving our monthly, quarterly, and annual reports in an email, regular email, you can subscribe here just by typing in your email, and we promise we won't send you any spam or anything like that, or share it with anybody else. So the website address is cerc.com/subscribe. So really easy, straightforward thing to sign up for. One other web page I want to show you is where you can. We have an archive of our monthly and annual, and also our quarterly reports. So if you want to see, any of our previous reports that we published, we have a couple of pages set up for that. So if you, from our homepage, if you go to the climate data tab at the top and scroll down to monthly/seasonal climate information, that will bring you to this page. And if you scroll down to the bottom, there's a section Southeast Monthly Climate Report. And we've started the archive back last summer. But you can also, if you want to go back even before that, the section just above that actually has all of the reports going back to June 2003. So this is kind of a nice archive for those reports, monthly and annual. And we have a different page set up for our quarterly climate impacts and outlook reports. And these are in a little bit of a different format than the monthly and annuals. We partner with NCEI and also our some of our state climatologists and a lot of our partners across the region to produce these reports. And so we have a nice archive of those, and also any special reports that we issue. This was one we produced for that fall 2016 drought that I talked about. So we have all of those hyperlinked here for you. So I wanted to spend just a minute or two showing Southeast Climate Perspectives, which is a tool we developed to basically take a variety of station data across the region and to place current conditions, historical conditions of temperature or precipitation, and put those in a historical or climate perspective, sort of comparing temperatures that say were observed yesterday. How did those rank compared to the historical record, or what was the departure from average? How different from average was it? So I'll just show this tab here called Regional Map Perspectives. It's a really cool tool here that shows you all of the different first order stations. And so these are the automated airport stations. Here's the one for Raleigh-Durham area. And we also have co-op stations in here. So these are the citizen observer observations that are incorporated into the database. So just to kind of show you, how powerful this tool is, one thing you can do, let's just take a look and see for last year, annual temperatures last year, where did they rank? So we talked about how exceptionally warm portions of the region were. So let's just kind of show that in a map perspective. So we'll drop down here in this date selection box. I'll choose December 31st, and we'll choose year to date so that we'll look at the entire year of 2017. You notice that I chose mean temperature as the variable, so that's the average of the daily maximum and the daily minimum temperature. And let's look at the rankings, because there were quite a few exceptional rankings. So we'll click Show Perspectives, and you see a new map pops up here with the legend over here at the right showing kind of color coding, how the mean annual temperatures across the region ranked for individual stations. And so, you can see here that a lot of them are shaded in sort of the light red and dark red. So that indicates they're anywhere from their 5th warmest to all the way up to their warmest on record. A bunch of stations like, let's see, I think Augusta's here somewhere. Yeah, there's Augusta and others. So if another way you can look at this, departures from normal, so we'll change that. So you can see pretty much the entire region was above average, so anywhere from +1 to +4 degrees Fahrenheit or more above average. So really cool tool that we developed at the center that allows you to analyze temperature and precipitation data in a variety of different ways. So one other quick page that we developed, this is not just a Southeastern tool, we actually expanded it to incorporate all of the different regions that are reflective of the 6 regional centers. We also have a continental US map perspective that we developed, and so that'll pop up here. And let me just zoom in a little bit. And so we actually have, and in this version, the national version, we actually just have the automated stations here. I don't believe we have the co-op stations incorporated in this version. So just to show you a quick example, if we want to take a look at last month, so January, what did temperatures look like across the continental US? We'll produce a map that looks like this. And it's really cool to kind of, these patterns where we have such a different regime in the Western United States versus the Southeastern and Southern United States. It really I think the colors really showed that out well. We had, a lot of high pressure and ridging in the Western US. So you see all of the warmer than average temperatures across the West. And in contrast, we had a lot of troughing in the jet stream or lower pressure, which yielded colder or below average temperatures across the Southeast. And so you can kind of connect what's going on in the atmosphere to what we see in the temperature departures from normal. So I'll stop there with that. But that link, by the way, is if you go to climate data and scroll all the way towards the bottom, climate perspective links, that's where you can find that there. Let's see here. I think those were the main highlights that I wanted to show for our website.
Well, I appreciate that tour very much. We've got it up on the screen, Southeast Regional Climate Center, SERCC.com, if you're listening to the podcast version of our show tonight. And Jordan, thank you again for the report that you shared with us tonight. We'll be sure to link that out, and people can go to your website as well, too, if they want to kind of deep dive on all of these specifics. You're welcome to stick around as we wrap up our show here with a little overtime special. We'll go back on down to Charleston, South Carolina in just a second, but I almost completely forgot, and I'm sure Scotty Powell would have corrected me, but Jordan, I need to give you time to share your social media handles with us for you and or the center, so the folks who are listening to our show can get in touch with you guys if they have any questions to reach out directly to you.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that. So my personal handle is, or on Facebook, you can find me Jordan McLeod, obviously, is me, but also the Southeast Regional Climate Center. We have both a Facebook page and a Twitter page as well. So let me quickly pull those up here, and then I'll share my screen again.
And as you're doing that, I'll remind folks who are listening tonight from our kind of our extended coverage area outside the Carolinas that these guys are doing more than just North Carolina and South Carolina. So if you're watching us maybe in Phoenix City, Alabama tonight on our telecast there, they've got information for you as well.
Great. So here's so here's our Facebook page at the Regional Climate Center. And yeah, just Southeast Regional Climate Center, CERC. And so you can come here and like our page. William Schmitz posts at least once a day, if sometimes multiple times per day. Does a great job, updating everybody. Whether when we release a report, like we just published that the January report today. So here's the social media post for that on Facebook, and then we also have our Twitter page, which is at SERCC. And so there's me.
I like that retweet.
Yeah, I know. That's it looks really good. I think I recognize that guy.
Yeah, I like his hat.
So it'd be great. We try to do our best to really share and push out information as much as possible, and we love for folks to share the stuff that we put out there. So be glad to have you tag along.
I appreciate that very much, and thank you again, Jordan, to you and your colleagues for all this great data. Again, you're welcome to stick around as we head into OT and head down to Jared Smith.
Jordan, thanks again. That was really fantastic. I know I use RCC data constantly to pull out really random weird stats for my followers on my social media. So it's one of many great uses for it. Keep up the great work. It's awesome. So
appreciate that.
So everybody from Texas up to Maine had a little bit of a scare. You had the AccuWeather app installed yesterday. Around 8:30 or so, routine test of the tsunami warning system was run by the National Tsunami Forecast Center, and AccuWeather seemed to grab that and send it out to everybody, and it was a very interesting problem to try and figure out what the heck happened. So let me just share what this looked like real quick. I'm gonna just go through a series of tweets, and when we look at this is from Courier in Charleston, and clearly everybody freaking out. I know Scotty and everybody on NWS was getting messages from all the local weather forecast offices saying there was no tsunami warning. It was a little crazy. It was a little crazy. But AccuWeather, for some reason, grabbed this test and pushed it out to everybody as a tsunami warning. If you click through, if you tap through, you would see that it was a test, and like, okay, you can breathe. You don't have to run to high ground. But unlike the guy who replied to the Post and Courier, the guy from Hawaii did not find a new job. Let me just make that completely clear. This is not a Hawaii thing. This is nothing like that. The Weather Service transmitted it mostly correctly. AccuWeather parsed it pretty forgivingly, but mostly correctly. And so, when you have a situation like this, often you find that it's kind of a confluence of events, and that's certainly what happened here. So it was kind of fun to do a little Twitter sleuthing on this, and I put together a little thread on Twitter, on my personal Twitter, and first thought was, okay, AccuWeather didn't see the it didn't see the test text in the product, and it said test. I mean, here's what it looked like. Here's one thing that it looked like, but there's a little clue at the bottom of this. We're gonna get back to that in a second. But you see test all over the place. No big deal, right? And it wasn't coded with the usual valid time extent code. And what the heck is valid time extent code? So let's get really nerdy with it here. This is frightening to anybody who has never dealt with parsing Weather Service text products, but we'll look at this PV text string here. And what this is basically a bunch of code that says, what kind of product is it? Is it operational? Is it a test? What is it? Is it a new warning? Is it a continued warning? Et cetera, et cetera. What office issued it? What kind of phenomena is it? Is it a tsunami? Is it a tornado? Is it a severe thunderstorm? Significance? Is it a warning? Is it a watch? Things like that. The ETN, the event tracking number, we'll get to that, back to that in just a second. And then start and end times for it as well. And so you'll note that, you know, we didn't quite get that VTech code in there. So that's kind of interesting. There's a lot of weird stuff going on with these tests that were being issued, because as it turned out, it sent one copy that had all of these things. This is a follow-up message, and it had all of these UC county codes here. And then there's your VTech with the test there, with the ETN incremented. But yeah, it was an interesting confluence of events. We thought, okay, maybe it was a truncated message. Maybe it was, maybe AccuWeather's parser for some reason. Maybe somebody did a code push and reverted all the stuff that said look for test. But started talking with Daryl Hersman, father of NWS Chat from Iowa State, and he's got these are his 2 cents, and it makes sense. Number one, the tsunami products are a little weird. There's typical policy directives that are in place, very strict format that you can validate against. It's all published on the web. If you're looking for a great way to spend time with friends at parties, you can pull out the NWS, the product descriptions there, and you can really, you will be the most popular guy there. Everything was coded with a test, but this third part here where it said the event tracking number 3 was reused and should not have been. Devin Boyer, who works at Mapbox, which is it's a mapping company. They kind of compete with Google Maps. They have beautiful web maps. But he's also a meteorologist, a Penn State grad. And what had happened was the test used an event tracking number that had been used previously with the tsunami threat that originated a couple weeks ago, on the 24th of January, where we had that earthquake that happened in the Pacific, and we were very concerned about Kodiak, Alaska, and those areas. And so the test reused event tracking number 3. And so AccuWeather's parser, presumably, without having any sort of knowledge of how AccuWeather's parser works, saw that and assumed it was an update and pushed out that update to that original event. So that is probably the best theory of what happened. There was a lot of back and forth, a lot of finger pointing. I'll freely admit, I was like, well, wait a second. It says test. It clearly says test. The Weather Service did nothing wrong. Actually, yeah, there was something slightly wrong. Just that one little number didn't increment from 3 to 4. Made all the difference in the world. Fun epilogue to this is that after all was said and done, the Tsunami Warning Center issued another tsunami warning that said there was no tsunami warning. So this is a test product and everything, and this is the after test product. And my Weather Channel app had an active tsunami warning in effect later that morning. So certainly a very interesting situation. But as you can see, we're all high and dry. No tsunamis to be seen. And so as a result, it's a very complex programming problem. It's a very, when you get systems like this, it usually takes a confluence of events for things to go wrong like this. And it just happened to be that you combine this one weird ETN with this test product that went through. Most parsers rejected it. You didn't really see alerts from anybody else. But in the case of AccuWeather, it was like, hey, this looks like an update. Push it out. So that's what happened. That's what I think happened. I would love to hear, if I know that there's probably proprietary stuff involved. AccuWeather probably isn't going to get into the details of it. I know that they were a little mad about NWS pointing figures, and there's just a lot of finger pointing in weather Twitter. But ultimately, the long and short of it is that the Weather Enterprise has some work to do. Blame is usually shared, and in this case it was. And no, the guy from Hawaii is not working at AccuWeather.
Jared, thank you very much. That was extremely insightful, so appreciate that. I guess really a big question is, what do we do if there is one here? We've never been through that kind of exercise before, so that's definitely something maybe we could do another show on, and maybe have Stephen Jamais from the College of Charleston come back on, since he was on with us a couple years back when there's a lot of earthquake activity going on. But what do we do? along our coastline. We can't even get a 2-day evacuation right for a hurricane. What do we do when there's a tsunami? These are great questions. So it might be a good time to visit that topic sometime this year.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for all your information.
When you write National Weather Service parsers for fun, that's what happens. So there you go.
And I was just going to echo that point. I feel like I understand what happened now so much clearer and so much better than I did yesterday, as so many of us were trying to figure out what was going on. So nice detective work, Mr. Smith. And with that, we'll go ahead and look to start wrapping up our show. But before we do, I know a couple of us have some tweets of the week we wanted to very quickly share, including our guest tonight, Jordan, who brought a tweet along. So if you've got that up, I can make my way over to you. But while you work to pull that up, I think Jared's got his. So let's go to Jared real fast.
Yeah, why the heck not? One more from me. So, y'all watched the Falcon Heavy launch. That was incredible. It was just phenomenal. And watching the rockets land next to each other, and then the Tesla, now on its way to an orbit that will circle Mars. I mean, Elon Musk is amazing. But William Churchill over at National Weather Service in Memphis caught a really cool thermal signature from GOES East, GOES 16. As Falcon Heavy was launching. I'm going to try and zoom in on this a little bit. Let's see if the zoom actually works. Oh, yeah, there it is. So, so there's your, this is on water vapor imagery. I think this was mid-level, as I recall, and there's your little thermal signature right there of the rocket taking flight. And and there's also plenty of other, there's other visible images out there. You could see the heat settling at the launch pad there, but this is really cool as it was racing up into orbit with Starman and Elon's Roadster. So again, if you missed that Falcon Heavy launch, I really, 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 really strongly encourage that you watch it. It was awe-inspiring. I really enjoyed it.
And if you did miss it for any reason, you could watch it on our platforms, YouTube, Periscope, YouTube, Facebook, and the like. I think I said YouTube twice to see all those spectacular images. Is that what you got for us as well, Shay? You got that glorious view there from the dash?
I sure do. And the bottom picture are the two side cores that are returning back to the landing pads, which is amazing in itself. I think we just being in this day and age, seeing this kind of technology is incredible. Now the central core, I'm not sure what happened there. It was a little foggy. I think they went offline. I don't think it made it back to its pad in the Pacific. I'm not entirely sure of that, but yeah, we're not sure exactly what happened there. But the beautiful thing is that the two side cores did return and landed simultaneously, and Starman is out and about, floating in space. Now he's going to be in an elliptical orbit inside of his car, his Roadster, his Tesla Roadster, for about the next 200, maybe 400 million years. So maybe the sun may taint that paint a little bit. There's been all kinds of debate about that, but will it stay red? Will the sun's radiation turn it white? We don't know, but it's going to be out there for a really long time. Pretty neat stuff. I tell you, just like Jared said, if you haven't gotten a chance to see it, watch it. And you can watch Starman live on YouTube. Just put Starman in YouTube. It should be like one of the first ones that comes up. So, and let's see.
I'm going to go ahead and share my tweet real fast as we look at some of the video from yesterday, keeping with our space theme. I found this while I was doing some reading from the Washington Post about an amateur radio operator who was listening. He was actually looking, if you remember, there have been a couple spy satellite launches recently, and he was trying to find one of those. And what he accidentally came across was an image satellite. That's actually the name of it, IMAGE, an old NASA satellite that had gone up to look at space weather some years ago, and as I understand it, some solar effects as well too. NASA had lost contact with it, and while he was scanning the skies, came across the satellite. A really interesting piece on how they thought the computer had essentially become frozen in space, not literally frozen, but to borrow the PC term, it became unresponsive. They have a theory on how it reset itself and how this guy managed to find it. And so they've been trying to figure out what to do with it after regaining contact for the first time in 12 years. I thought that was a really cool story. Jordan, what did you bring for us?
Yeah, so let's see here. So continuing on the Starman theme with the launch of that rocket, Tropical Cyclone Siebel photobomb here from Starman. So you can kind of see here in the background the tropical cyclone. So I thought that was a pretty cool image continuing on this theme. And then a little funnier version, I thought, the MARTA bus. Yeah, made it.
Oh, that's perfect. That is perfect. It's just like Levi to put something like that up for his tweet, but this is hilarious. That's Matt Lanza for you, folks.
Oh, that's great.
That's real good. Thank you for bringing that along, Jordan. Is Jordan our first guest to actually bring a tweet of the week?
I think so.
I think so. So Gold Star A+, not only to your report, but also for remembering to bring a tweet. I know we had a full packed show tonight. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. I'm going to go ahead and change that lower third because it's a little outdated as we head over to Scotty Powell to wrap up tonight's show and tell you what's coming up in future weeks right here on the Carolina Weather Group.
I feel so bad because I really didn't get into the space launch yesterday, and you guys have all geeked out about it. So now I'm going to have to go brush up on that. But yeah, thank you so much, Jordan, for coming on tonight. Next week, we have the week off as many folks will be celebrating the Valentine's holiday. But after that, we have Samantha Burksett. She is a artist / meteorologist. So she's going to be joining us on the 21st to talk about how art and meteorology have come together for her passion of painting and making artistic, all kinds of artistic things dealing with weather. And then to close out the month of February, I'm not sure, Shay, I've seen our email earlier today. I don't think we have a guest confirmed yet for the 28th, but we're going to be talking about the new GOES, I guess it's GOES R or GOES S that's going to be launched on March 1st. We're going to have folks on the 28th, February 28th, talking to us about that. But from my understanding, Shay, on our email, we don't have a guest confirmed yet, correct?
Yeah, no, NOAA Officer John Leslie, we're in contact. You and I are in contact with him. Yeah. And he said, don't worry, we will have a top-notch guest joining us for that launch to talk about it. So it is the GOES S, which will be allocated to the West Coast. So we had GOES R, which was allocated to GOES East, which is now GOES 16. This one will be GOES West, the replacement for that one. So, yep, looking forward to it. We'll have both the country, we'll have the tropics. It's going to be amazing. We're just, and then we have 2 more satellites going after that. So, exciting.
Yes.
Time.
So we're not sure who's going to be joining us that night, but we are going to, like Shay said, John did promise us to have an expert with us on the 28th. And then the month of March, we start the National Weather Podcast Month, and we're excited about that as well. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on and start promoting that. But it looks like a fun and exciting time here as the Carolina Weather Group continues through the year 2018. So we're well past our allotted time, so we'll go ahead and log off this evening. But we want to thank you for watching us here at the Carolina Weather Group. And as always, make sure that you like our social media pages, Twitter and Facebook, and follow us on those platforms, as well as downloading our podcasts on iTunes or Google Play or Stitcher or TuneIn Radio. Numerous ways to be able to listen to our podcast. So for everyone here at the Carolina Weather Group, we hope you have a great week. Have a great week. Next week we'll be off. So I think James had said earlier that we may be playing a rebroadcast of one of our favorite shows. But next week we're off, and then we'll be back joining you on the 21st of February. Have a great week, and we'll see you then.